In June of 1957, I was appointed pastor of the Otagoville Methodist Circuit. It was a circuit of 6 Methodist churches that geographically covered over 1/3 of the county. And people in the different churches went to 3 different towns to do their shopping and their hospital. So I had a lot of territory to cover. I'd have to go 30 miles in one direction to a hospital, 25 miles in another directions, and the people were scattered, of course, all over the county. I realized that I had to get rid of the old Pontiac I was driving. I was getting about 6 miles to the gallon on gas, and I traded that in, bought a new 57 Volkswagen. Had to wait 6 months to get it. But I covered the territory, and I was excited. My very first full-time pastorate. The first, within 2 or 3 days after we had moved in, maybe the second day, we had yet to unpack all the boxes, George Sheridan came by. George was a member of one of the churches, introduced himself, and just stopped by to visit and get acquainted and welcome me to the neighborhood. While we were talking, George said, "You know, Brother White, my predecessor, was a little liberal for these folks around here. There was even talk, a rumor going around that the Klan had planned to burn a cross in front of the parsonage." Well, I knew David White, and I thought, my Lord, if people around here thought he was liberal, I was in for a wild ride. But I didn't say anything. But when he had mentioned about burning the cross, I said, "George, that would be terrible." He said, "Yeah, it would be." And I said, "Well, I keep a shotgun just inside the door for protection, and I just think that something like that happened middle of the night, all the confusion. If I shot somebody and hurt them or killed them, I don't know if I could live with that." And he mumbled a little bit, and we talked about a few other things, and he said, "Well, I gotta go." After he left, my wife reminded me that I didn't have a gun inside the front door. In fact, I didn't own a gun. Didn't then, don't own one now. And I said, "I know that, and you know that. George didn't know that." A couple of days later, I ran into Al Shanks, one of the other members, and he said, "I understand you had a visit from the Klan the other day." I said, "Well, I guessed as much." There were no crosses ever burned in front of the parsonage. I'm not exactly sure why. But things picked up right after I got there. This was a hot time, temperature-wise, summertime in Black Belt, Alabama. But also culturally and racially. This is 1957. And the integration issue was foremost on everybody's mind, including people in the church. The Methodist Church was organized in such a way that structurally the integration of the church could be easily taken care of because we had black church members, and of course the churches in the South particularly were black churches with black pastors. But the church was structured in such a way that we had 5 geographical jurisdictions. So if you were in Montgomery, for example, or in Alabama, you would be in the southeastern jurisdiction. But we had one racial jurisdiction, so that all African Americans who lived in the United States, regardless of whether they lived, Miami, Seattle, Texas, were in the same jurisdiction. Now, all that was necessary, as far as the process is concerned, is simply abolish the central jurisdiction, which meant that the African American, the black churches in the geographical area of Montgomery or wherever in the southeast would be in the same jurisdiction. That didn't call for mandatory integration of the local churches, but that was almost beside the issue. Tempers were hot. And within the first 2 weeks after I was there, the chairman of the official board called a church conference to vote the wishes of the congregation on the motion to abolish the central jurisdiction. Harmon, the chairman of the board, started off, he was angry, he was upset, and he started off on a tirade, even before the issue was before the group. And I said nothing. I knew that I was in trouble. And so I sat there and was very quiet, determined not to say anything, until at one point Harmon said, "And the people who want integration, it's the communists." I said, "Harmon, excuse me, but you may want to rephrase that." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm in favor of the motion. I think it's time the church integrated. But I'm not a communist. And if you want to call me a communist, then we'll have to take that to court. And I don't think that's a good way to start off our relationship." He backed away just a little bit. The vote was taken. I was the only person who was in favor of the resolution, and the meeting was adjourned. And I could tell Harmon was about to blow his gasket. So I got out of the church as quick as I could, almost ran down the aisle, so that I could meet him when he came out. And when he came out the door, I put my hand out and I said, "Harmon, the bishop says I'm going to be your pastor for this year. Here's my hand. We can shake and learn how to disagree and get along, or we can fight. You call it." He looked down to the ground and looked up at me, and he said, "Hell, I can't fight a preacher." And I said, "Sure you can." And I knew, dear God, if he wanted to fight, he could clean my clock. And finally he said, "Well, no, I don't want to fight." And he put out his hand, and we shook hands. We had a lot of arguments and a good bit of conflict as time went on, but we learned to get along with each other. And Harmon was a good chairman of the board. And I'm not sure he ever changed his opinion about, especially about race, but we managed to get along. And I thought to myself, I'm lucky. I came out of this okay. I knew there was going to be trouble ahead, but I thought nothing would be as contentious as this. Boy, was I wrong. One of the first official board meetings that I attended, Beulah Lee, I think, was the one that brought it up, that the people were leaving their church bulletins in the sanctuary after the service, and it was creating a mess, and we didn't have a janitor, so somebody had to pick up all the bulletins. And I thought, that's a no-brainer. That's such a simple problem. What's the big deal about it? But it didn't say anything. And I just let everybody talk, and everybody agreed that was a real problem. Well, while they were debating the issue, I thought, I've got a brilliant idea. My illimitable wisdom is a simple solution to this. You see, we had no secretary, so I did the bulletin. I structured it. I picked out the hymns, did everything, put the announcements in. Even ran off the bulletin on an old mimeograph machine that we had in the parsonage, and gave the copies to the ushers on Sunday morning. So I had this brainstorm. The next Sunday, in preparation for the Sunday, we had the order of worship that we used was in the front page of the hymnal, and that we used it just like it was. And we had hymn boards up front for put the hymn numbers up and the responsive reading. And so that Sunday, I just took the front page where I'd ordinarily put the order of worship. I put the sermon topic, outline of the sermon, even had space to put a short story about one of the hymns that we would be singing, and give more information to the congregation. And then I put the announcements and everything else on the other pages. Ran the bulletin off. The Sunday morning, I had a couple of young people that were ushers, and I gave them the bulletins, but I said, I don't want you to hand them out as people come to worship. I want you to hold them and give them to people as they leave to go home. Stroke of genius. There's no problem with the service. People looked around, couldn't find a bulletin. They thought, well, Max just forgot to run one off. No big deal. Used the order of worship, had the hymn numbers, everything went smoothly. Good service. And as people were leaving, the kids handed out the bulletins. Nobody left a bulletin in the church. They had the announcements they could take home with them to refer to them. They had that brilliant little paragraph that I had written. Problem solved. Right? Wrong. I was down at the post office about the middle of the week picking up my mail. Roberta, the postmistress, said, Max, are you ready for your meeting tonight? And I said, well, yeah, I think so. Why? Why do you ask? And she said, well, Beulah Lee was in here, and she is fit to be tied. And I said, about what? She said, about the church bulletin. I said, what? What about the church bulletin? She said, well, that's not the way we've always done it. And I can bet you bottom dollar that you're going to hear about it tonight. I said, no. I was wrong. I had the opening prayer almost before I finished. Before we even got to the agenda, Beulah Lee said, and I can see it to this day, red in the face, hyperventilating, and she said, I want to know why we can't have the bulletin like we've always had it. And I thought, my Lord, I'm not going to get sunk over something as piddly as the church bulletin. What I said was, Beulah Lee, I'm sorry, but if this is the will of the church, I have no problem going back to the way we had it before. 45 minutes after I had said, I'll be perfectly willing to change and do the bulletin the old way. 45 minutes, we finally just got through with the issue and went on to other business. 10:30 at night, I'm out in the backyard at the parsonage lifting weights. And my wife said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to stay in the ministry or not. When I told what happened to a retired preacher friend of mine, he said, Max, you shouldn't be surprised. And I said, why? And he said, it's always the little things that get you. I stayed there 3 years, visited the sick, married, buried, taught the Bible, always preached the gospel of social justice. The people heard, they responded, they came, we grew a little bit. I learned to love those people, warm and wonderful. Could not envision a new society that was integrated. There were times when I felt like I was a chaplain to the blind. But it was a good time. And I learned something from that experience. You need to be prepared for the large issues that face you. But watch out, because it's the little things that'll get you.